1939. The world held its breath in a fragile silence. People were living their everyday lives. Children were playing in the streets. Yet in the shadows, a monster was slowly waking up. The scent of gunpowder and blood was beginning to hang in the air. Millions of people were in their homes, completely unaware that in just a few short years their world would return to ash. This is the story of humanity's greatest test, a war that changed the world forever. This is the story of the Second World War. To understand the start of this conflict, we must first look back at the pain that came before it. The defeat in World War I had plunged Germany into a darkness of humiliation, poverty, and national despair. The Treaty of Versailles, a peace settlement signed in 1919, was meant to prevent another great war. Instead, it planted the seeds of the next. This treaty was a brutal blow. It forced Germany to accept full responsibility for the war, stripped it of vast territories and overseas colonies, and imposed crippling war reparations that the nation had no hope of ever paying. The German economy collapsed into hyperinflation. The currency became so worthless that people used it as kindling for fires. A nation once proud was now a broken, starving shell. This pain was a wound that one man knew how to exploit. His name was Adolf Hitler. He was not a politician, but a captivating speaker who promised to wash away German mistakes. He told the people exactly what they longed to hear. We Germans are the master race. It is our right to rule the world. We must reclaim our lost honor. Millions, desperate and hungry, were swayed by his words. In his eyes was an all-consuming fire, the fire of ambition, vengeance, and the desire to burn the world to the ground. Slowly, he built up his power and led his political party, Nazi Party, to absolute control. He whispered a chilling promise. There will be a war, and this war will break humanity's bones. He began to systematically rebuild the German military in direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. He reoccupied the Rhineland, a demilitarized zone, and annexed Austria. The world watched but did little to stop him, clinging to a false hope of peace. They didn't understand that for Hitler, peace was simply a pause between aggressions. On the morning of September 1st, 1939, the ground of Poland began to tremble. It was a surprise attack of unprecedented speed and ferocity. This new German strategy was called Blitzkrieg, the lightning war. The idea was to strike with such overwhelming force and speed that the enemy couldn't even organize a defense. German tanks like Iron Dragons rolled over cities and towns, crushing everything in their path. The roar of warplanes filled the air, and then bombs rained down from the sky. In the villages of Poland, women screamed, children ran in terror, and young men tried to face down modern tanks with ancient rifles. But what was the result? In just a few weeks, the entirety of Poland was bleeding and broken. This was the moment the world truly realized what was happening. As soon as Poland was attacked, Great Britain and France, who had guaranteed Poland's independence, declared war on Germany. But were they ready? Not for the speed of Hitler's war machine. This was the exact moment the world knew for certain. The Second World War had begun. Germany's blitzkrieg swept across Europe. They invaded Denmark and Norway to secure naval bases, then turned their attention to the west. They attacked Belgium and the Netherlands, and then, on May 10, 1940, the German army launched its invasion of France. The French military believed they were safe behind their supposedly impenetrable defense system, the Maginot Line. But the Germans simply went around it, cutting through the Ardennes forest, a region the French considered impassable for tanks. The German armored divisions sliced through France like a hot knife through butter. On the roads of France, tanks roared, sirens wailed, and church bells rang in panic. Entire villages fled in terror, but there was nowhere to go. In just 6 weeks, the mighty French army was defeated. Paris fell. The entire continent became a battlefield in a game of death. Hitler's victory was a shock to the world. A massive Allied force, British, French, and Belgian soldiers, was trapped on the beaches of Dunkirk. In a desperate act of courage, hundreds of civilian boats sailed across the English Channel to rescue them. The Dunkirk evacuation, though a military defeat, was a symbolic act of defiance, saving over 338,000 soldiers. But it left Great Britain alone, the last bastion of hope in a Europe dominated by the Nazi regime. In 1940, Hitler set his sights on England. He knew he couldn't invade by land without first crushing the Royal Air Force. He launched a massive air campaign, the Battle of Britain. He began with military targets, but when the British struck back at Berlin, he changed his strategy. Hitler's new target was the heart of the British spirit, London. The nights of London, once so peaceful, became a nightly horror show. The sky turned a fiery red as thousands of bombs rained down. This campaign was called the Blitz. From September 1940 to May 1941, Londoners spent their nights huddled in air raid shelters and underground subway stations. They listened to the terrifying sound of bombs falling, never knowing if the next one would be for them. A small girl shivering in the dark might ask her mother, "Mom, Will we wake up tomorrow? The mother had no answer. Her only response was tears that streamed down her face as death poured from the sky. Yet, the British spirit never broke. Under the steadfast leadership of Prime Minister Winston Churchill, they endured. The RAF, though outnumbered, bravely fought off the German Luftwaffe. This was the first major defeat for Hitler's forces. He had failed to break Britain, and the world saw that he was not invincible. The year was 1941. Japan, a military power in the Pacific, had been quietly sharpening its sword. The United States had so far stayed out of the direct conflict, committed to an isolati. The United States was stunned. On December 8th, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress and called the day a date which will live in infamy. The attack had sealed America's fate. The sleeping giant was awakened. The U.S. declared war on Japan. And just days later, Germany and Italy declared war on the U.S., pulling America fully into the European conflict. The war, once a European and Asian affair, was now a true world war. Soil of Germany, there was more than just a war being fought. A different, more horrifying story was being written. A story of blood and unspeakable cruelty. This was the story of the concentration camps. Jews, political prisoners, Roma people, homosexuals, and the disabled were rounded up and packed into trains like cattle. In their eyes, there was only fear and one silent question: will we survive? But they were greeted at the end of their journey with the muzzles of guns. Thousands of people were worked to death in forced labor camps. But that was not the end of the nightmare. Hitler's final solution was a plan for the systematic extermination of the Jewish people. This was the Holocaust. In camps like Auschwitz-Birkenau, hundreds of thousands of people were herded into gas chambers and murdered. They were killed simply because they were considered different or inferior by the Nazi regime. Children were not spared. This was the worst act of organized, state-sponsored genocide in human history, a stain on the soul of humanity. The horror of the Holocaust stands as a stark reminder of the evil that can rise from hatred and intolerance. In June 1941, Hitler made his greatest mistake. He launched a massive invasion of the Soviet Union known as Operation Barbarossa. He believed his army would easily conquer the Soviet forces and seize the nation's resources. But the land of Russia was not so easy to tame. The German army marched deep into Soviet territory, but they were not prepared for the brutal Russian winter. The temperature dropped to unthinkable lows. Snow, frost, starvation. German soldiers began to freeze to death. Their machines, their tanks, and their rifles all stopped working in the crippling cold. The Soviets, though initially caught off guard, regrouped and fought back fiercely. The civilians, every man and woman, rose up to defend their homeland. They fought from every alley, every house. The pivotal battle was the Battle of Stalingrad. It was a brutal city-level conflict. The streets ran red with blood. The Germans were trapped in a city they couldn't conquer, surrounded by a relentless Soviet force. After months of grueling combat, the German Sixth Army was starved and frozen into submission. This was Hitler's first major defeat. It was the turning point of the war on the Eastern Front, a moment that marked the beginning of the end for the Nazi war machine. By 1944, the tide of the war had shifted. The Soviet Union was pushing from the east, and its allies were ready to open a new front in the west. On June 6, 1944, a new chapter in history was written in the beaches of Normandy. It was D-Day. Thousands of Allied soldiers from America, Great Britain, and Canada launched the largest seaborne invasion in history. As their landing craft approached the shore, they were met with a storm of bullets and fire. The sky was red, and the ocean was stained with blood. But the soldiers pushed forward, fighting for every inch of beach. In their hearts, there was only one thought: if we stop today, our children will live as slaves. This was the beginning of the end for Germany. The Allies, with a foothold in Europe, began to liberate France and push towards Germany from the west, while the Soviets advanced relentlessly from the east. The German forces were now squeezed between two massive armies. The path to Berlin was open. The year was 1945. Every corner of Berlin was on fire. The roar of Soviet tanks could be heard in the streets. Hitler was hiding in his underground bunker, his dreams of a 1,000-year empire in ruins. The fire in his eyes was replaced by terror. With the Soviet army closing in, he knew his time was up. On April 30th, 1945, in his final act of defiance, he took his own life. With him died the monstrous dream of a Nazi empire. Germany officially surrendered a week later. The war in Europe was over. But was the war truly over? No, Japan was still fighting. On August 6, 1945, over the Japanese city of Hiroshima, a single bomb was dropped from a plane. It was an atomic bomb. In an instant, the entire city was vaporized. A flash of light brighter than 1,000 suns, and then nothing but a city of ashes. Hundreds of thousands of people, children, women, and the elderly, were gone in a fraction of a second. 3 days later, the same horrific fate befell the city of Nagasaki. The power of the atom was unleashed again. Japan, facing unimaginable destruction and with no will to fight left, surrendered unconditionally. The world watched and understood. The war was finally over. The Second World War was more than just a conflict. It was humanity's greatest trial. Over 70 million people died, both soldiers and civilians. Entire cities were destroyed, nations were shattered, but from the ashes of destruction, the world learned a terrible lesson. We learned that in war, there are no winners. Everyone loses. The war showed us the terrifying depths of hatred and the lengths to which ambition can lead. But it also showed us the boundless courage and unbreakable will of the human spirit. From this horror, the world came together and formed the United Nations, an organization dedicated to preventing such a global catastrophe from ever happening again. This war is not just a historical event. It is a lesson that reminds us of the profound value of peace, tolerance, and empathy. It is a lesson that we must never, ever forget. Remembering this story is essential so that we can teach future generations the true value of peace. If you found this story compelling, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more stories from history. What are your thoughts on World War II? Let us know in the comments below.